Good evening and welcome to the launch of the PCS Dying for Sick Pay campaign. I'd like to introduce our speakers first. So joining me tonight, I'm Fran Heathcote, the President of PCS, and joining me are Mark Sawalka, our General Secretary, John McDonnell, Member of Parliament for Hayes and Harlington, Ahmed Yousofi, ISS Security Guard on the Bays contract, and Tony from United UVW working as a parks attendant for Vinci in the Royal Parks. I'd also like to give a shout out to Richard, our signer, who's joining us this evening to make sure that people get as much out of this as possible. And just by way of introduction, I'm really pleased to be launching our campaign tonight on International Justice Day for Cleaners and Security Guards, which is held every year in memory of a group of Los Angeles janitors who were beaten up by the police during a peaceful demonstration against their contractor employer. This year marks the 30th anniversary of the incident and comes in the midst of the COVID-19 crisis that has seen our cleaners, security guards, maintenance staff, catering staff, and porter members and many others providing the first line of defence in our workplaces, often at great personal risk to themselves and to their families. PCS members working on outsourced contracts, particularly those working in facilities management roles, for example, cleaners, security guards, porters, catering staff and maintenance staff, are only entitled to statutory sick pay. That's £95.85 per week or £19.17 per day. That equates to approximately just 20% of their normal wages. In addition, SSP is only payable from the fourth day of sickness. That means that our members are often forced to work when they're sick because they can't afford not to, with SSP rates being what they are. During COVID-19, through PCS talks, most civil service departments have adopted a policy of paying their outsourced staff full pay for COVID-19 related absences. In other words, to self-isolate if a member has symptoms or lives in the same household as somebody who has symptoms, to shield if a member has a medical condition that places them in the clinically extremely vulnerable group, to undertake care and responsibilities if alternative arrangements cannot be made, or if a member's workplace is closed or partially closed. But most notably, the Ministry of Justice has not yet implemented this policy, effectively treating our outsourced members as second-class citizens. The government wants to rid themselves of paying full occupational sick pay as soon as the pandemic is over. So the aim of our campaign is to defend and extend full sick pay for our hard-working but often unseen members employed on civil service outsourced contracts. The COVID-19 crisis has to mark a turning point. It's time to show proper appreciation for the enormous contribution that cleaners, security guards, and our other outsourced members make to society by giving them better pay and working conditions, as well as dignity and respect at work. And so this evening, I'm delighted to introduce Ahmed Yousofi from ISS and Tony from the United Voices of the World Union, in order for them both to say a little bit about the work that they're doing. So if we could start with you, Ahmed, why is this campaign so important for you and your colleagues?
Hi, for those of you that don't know me, I work at ISS, so I work in the mailroom, and I want to say the main reason why it's so important for me is that it impacts us all on a collective basis. It's just a question whether or not we realize how many people are involved altogether. Being 27 years old, I would consider myself young and fit, to the point where I train excessively, where I take care of myself and my strengths and don't have to worry about it as much. But I've got moments in time where I've had injuries or concerns where you don't necessarily want to be treated as a second-class citizen, especially for a company that you work for, a place that you provide a service for. And I feel that is something that impacts us all collectively, and through the voice and speaker that is PCS, I'm able to better articulate that. And through that, I also wanted to just thank Kate Leslie and Sharon for helping me with that in that sense.
Okay, thanks so much, Ahmed. And over to you, Tony. We're really pleased that Tony from UVW could join us tonight. And I just wonder if I could ask you the same question. Why is this campaign so important to you and your colleagues?
Tony.
Have we got you there, Tony? Are you on mute?
Hello?
Hello. Is that
Hello.
Tony?
There we go.
Right,
There we go.
here we go.
Well,
Sorry, I
welcome.
think I had you on mute.
Don't worry. Just tell us a little bit about why the campaign is so important for you.
Yeah, it's important for obvious reasons. When one is sick, how else are you going to get paid if you're off sick? When people are scared to go off sick because obviously they don't get it. So, you know, living on what, the £95 is it now for a week? What can you do? What would you pay first? You don't know what to pay first. I mean, I was a couple of years back, I was off for 3 months because I had an operation with an appendix, and it was hard, you know, but luckily, and I had my children around me and my partner, so we battled it through. But yeah, it's important because obviously, for obvious reasons, if you're sick, you know, how can you work?
Yeah, absolutely.
Same with my colleagues thinks the same things. So
yeah. Okay, well, look, I think that gets to the nub of it, doesn't it? You know, how do you survive and which bills do you pay first when you have so little money coming in? And obviously, the important thing is to try and keep safe during this period. And so people have a very stark choice, don't they? Yeah. I'm really pleased tonight that John McDonnell can join us. John, as I say, is the MP for Hayes and Harlington, but obviously, John, we recognise the pressures on your time. I know you've got another meeting quite soon, and I wonder if you could just give us a little bit of information about what the parliamentary group is going to do to support the campaign.
Okay, I think what we've got to do, all of us now, but we'll do it through the parliamentary group. For those who don't know about the parliamentary group, it's we set it up a number of years ago. We brought MPs together, other political parties, Labour Party, SNP, and we brought them together to talk, really to act as the voice of the union in Parliament. So when our PCS members decide on a policy or a campaign, we basically voice that campaign in Parliament itself. And we use every mechanism we can, meeting with ministers, raising issues in debates, putting down parliamentary questions. And some of you have been involved in that, and it's been fantastic. You've fed us information and briefings on what's happening in different sectors of the work that PCS members do. And that gives us the opportunity to speak with real authority about what's going on in the real world. And I always say to Mark, the General Secretary, often virtually on most occasions, we are, as individual MPs in the parliamentary group, we're better briefed than the minister who may be responsible for that particular department. And on this issue, I think it's exactly that. We've been able to draw attention and will continue to draw attention in Parliament and use every opportunity we can to draw attention to what the reality is for a lot of our members. And the reality is this, is that they are fearful about going sick. They are fearful about going sick because if they go sick, they get... Well, during the coronavirus crisis, the government has moved and most departments are now paying sick pay of some sort. But in normal circumstances, if you're an outsourced worker, what happens is you're having to choose between going to work or your health because you haven't got that security of income coming in. And we're trying to explain that to people. And it's interesting, isn't it, really, that during the coronavirus crisis, people have woken up to the fact that actually there's the key people in our society are people like cleaners and security, all those and carers, and those who treat us when we're in hospital, all those people who keep us safe and secure. And what we've been able to do now, thanks to the union, is we've been able to explain to people, these people you now recognise as important, do you know the way they're being treated, both in terms of low pay, lack of sick pay cover, and actually with disrespect in many instances. And so this campaign is all about securing that right to have a decent income when you're sick. And you know, when you explain to management as well, who wants somebody coming into work when they're sick? Because they put everybody at risk as a result of that. And so therefore, it is better to ensure people have the security of income so that when they are sick, they don't have to be forced to come into work, putting themselves at risk and also their colleagues and also the people that we serve. And I think it's a rational argument that we can win, but we've got to apply pressure to the government now to maintain the protections that have been provided, the sick pay that's been provided during the coronavirus crisis, and to maintain it permanently. Can I just also say, I find it deeply ironic that the Ministry of Justice will not mete out justice to its own workers and to the outsourced workers that keep the department running. I think it is, I just think not just ironic, it is the Ministry of Justice being unjust, I think is just outrageous. So what we'll do now is we'll be raising this issue in Parliament. We'll be making sure we're putting down questions, entering into debate. And yes, we'll be seeking meetings with ministers to impress upon them the importance of sick pay for our members and the important role that they play, and therefore they should have the protection that you'd expect for everybody. I think it's outrageous, actually, the way that people have been treated. And we know we've had also people, unfortunately, who've gone down with the virus, and we've lost members as well as a result. Now, what we don't want to do is live in a society where people are forced to come into work when they're sick, putting themselves, their families, and their colleagues at risk as well. This is something fundamental. I think it's great it's launched on the International Day as well, because it means, interestingly enough, we're now part of a much wider social movement campaigning on these issues for justice. And I think at the end of the day, in terms of justice for cleaners and security officers, I think the tragedy of the coronavirus, the loss of life for all the people who have been really sick and ill, if there's any good that comes out of it, maybe it will be that people do recognize and start valuing the people who actually lay the foundations of our society by keeping us, well, keeping the officers clean, making sure we're secure, and making sure that actually we're properly cared for. So that's why I'm participating in this. I think it's a fundamentally important campaign for our union, and I think it's an example to others as well. Final word is also, I just think we're at that stage where we're not going to be treated like this anymore. As Ahmed said, no, we shouldn't allow people to treat us like second-class members of our society. Our members who provide these services are important as anyone else. And I think many of the general public have recognized that. Now, the government has got to recognize that as well. And they've got to impose that upon the companies that provide the outsourced services as well. So that right the way across the piece, whether you're directly employed or in your outsourced company, you're treated fairly and you're treated properly. And when you're sick, you're looked after and properly cared for, and properly you have a proper income coming in. This campaign, I think, is quite historic, and it's going to be fundamentally important. And from the parliamentary group, we'll do everything we can to support.
Thanks very much, John. That's really welcome. And can I just remind people, if you're watching this on Facebook, ask people to like and share it. If you could like the event, share the event, we can get more and more people joined up in terms of this campaign. Can I just give a few shout outs? There's a hi here from PCS Revenue and Customs London North, from Sabine Garg from Dundee Pension Centre, from Toxteth Job Centre, Adrian Coog from Portsdown Vectis Branch Revenue and Customs, PCS South Brum, hello from DWP Ayrshire, Dumfries and Galloway Branch, Christine Oliver from Sunderland, hi from Preston Carers Allowance home workers, and shout outs from Charlie Little in Glasgow, from Patricia Walls, the cleaning supervisor from Regan House in Liverpool, greetings from the MOJ Midwest Branch, and greetings in solidarity from Workington RPA Northwest PCS Group. So thanks so much for that, and obviously it's good to know that you're all joining us, and without any further ado, we'll move on to Mark Sawalka. Really, Mark, in asking you to say a few words, I think the question that everybody's asking is, why are outsourced staff working in the civil service on different pay and conditions? If you could give a bit of a background about that, I think that would be a question well asked. So over to you, Mark.
I think he's still muted.
Mark, are you muted?
There you go.
Yeah, I don't worry, I was speaking in Welsh, but I'll do it in English now. I was saying, it's great to have Yousaf and Tony on with us tonight. And I want to just say that PCS very much welcomes working with United Voices. They've done some fantastic work standing up for some of the most exploited people across a number of institutions. It's great to have Tony with us tonight. And to Yusuf, not just for joining us, but for all the work that he's been doing with his colleagues in BEIS, where, you know, we've had a year of struggling there. The members have been absolutely amazing. And also to thank John, because John's our biggest supporter and he's done some brilliant work for us over the years. I mean, when you were leading off, one of the things that struck me is £19.17 a day. If you converted that, that is equivalent of working for just over £2 an hour. So I think we have to have in context that what this is a shameful stain on this country. And of course, we're talking about people here working in the civil service. And anyone who works in the civil service, and let's be clear, whether they're civil servants or whether they're working for private contractors, they are working for government. So for the government to essentially say to some of its key workers, and Boris Johnson calls them key workers, you know, if you're unfortunate enough to get ill, you'll get £2 an hour, is a disgrace. And we have to say that for our civil service, that's not acceptable. And your question is a really good one, because I started in the civil service in 1980, in the forerunner of the DWP. And when I started, the maintenance staff, the caterers, the cleaners, the security guards, they were all civil servants. We all had the same terms and conditions. We were all in the civil service. And as a union, we always took the view, you know, everybody should be treated properly. When you work in the public sector for the civil service, it was never brilliant. You know, we never had pots of gold, but at least everybody was treated the same. Now, since the 1980s, the governments, particularly then Margaret Thatcher's government, targeted many parts of the economy and particularly parts of the civil service to privatize. That's what it is, outsource work, starting with the type of jobs that we're talking about now. And they did it because they wanted to give juicy contracts to private companies who were making profits for shareholders. And those companies are making profits on the back of terms and conditions. And tonight's campaign illustrates that brilliantly. If you're sick and you're a civil servant, you get full pay from the moment you go sick, and you get 6 months full pay. If you're sick working in the civil service for a private contractor, you don't get anything for 3 days, and then you get £19 a day. Now that is two-tier workforce in the raw, and it's unacceptable, and this campaign has been launched to put that right. So in launching this campaign, we're taking really two major viewpoints forward. One, and I think it's important to say, we believe all of these workers should be brought back in-house and made civil servants. We wouldn't be having this conversation if people were civil servants. And ultimately, we think whether people are cleaning, doing security, reception, or catering, they have the right to be in the civil service, getting the same pension as us, the same sick pay, the same holidays, and being treated in every way equally. But until such a time as we can right that historic wrong and get people back in the civil service, this campaign, and I agree with John, it's one where all the arguments of justice and fair play and decency are on our side. We have on our side that Boris Johnson says that people are key workers, and yet he treats them in the most disgraceful way. And we are going to say that because of the union, we've managed to get full pay for COVID-related absences during the crisis, and that's now what we must defend. And therefore, we want people actually back in-house, but until that happens, we want people to have the same rights of sick pay as everybody else has. It's a basic human right. And our campaign tonight, and I'm sure we'll get questions on it, Fran, is not just launched on saying that's just and right. We want to talk about how we're going to do it, not just by raising political arguments, but by getting people to join the union, stand together, and to get our reps in the civil service who are civil servants to be raising it, recognizing that if we all stand together, Tony, Yusuf, and all of their colleagues should get the basic human right. If they're not well enough to be at work, they should be paid full pay, just like everybody else in the civil services.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark. And I think that's a point well made. John, we want to try and get some questions to you before you go, because clearly I know you've got to go to another meeting. Can I just ask you, given the current government's relationship with private business, how can we campaign politically on this issue?
Yeah. I think one of the key issues for us, I know we're aware of this problem, and we're aware of this issue because our members are having to endure it. I think there's a lack of understanding amongst not just the general public, but again, amongst a number of MPs and others as well. And it's interesting, all the campaigns that PCS have waged around low pay in particular and lack of benefits like this, particularly for those contracts that have been outsourced, when we've raised it, the lack of knowledge by MPs right up to ministerial level has been absolutely staggering. So part of our job now is to make sure they are fully briefed about this issue, how many people it affects, how it affects them, what the risks are. And then also, I think we've just got to mobilize as much pressure as we possibly can. The other thing where we've been successful in other campaigns is where we've been able to bring pressure to bear from the general public on individual constituency MPs as well. PCS have been really adept at getting information out, getting publicity stories in the media, and then people back in the constituency just understand what the problem is, and we then urge them to contact their local MP, and we build up the support in Parliament. There's a thing, you know, our members in the civil service, in the central departments will know that what happens when there's lots of noise, in other words, lots of things going on in Parliament, lots of letters coming in from MPs, publicity in the mainstream media and all the rest of it, civil servants will be reporting to their ministers, there's an issue here that needs to be addressed. And then eventually we will get shift. And that's what we've got to do here now, make as much noise as possible, both in terms of activities in Parliament, but also back in the constituencies as well. Getting people to contact their local MP, getting their families to contact the local MP, getting their neighbours, getting local community groups, religious groups and others raising it with the individual MP saying, do you know what's going on? Do you know what these people are having to endure? And do you know the risks that they're facing as a result of that? And I think that's the way we build up a climate of opinion that will eventually shift government. And it will, we will win, but what we have to do is be absolutely determined and really go at it now.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think that's important. Just a couple more shout outs. Fraternal greetings from John Watson, ex-PCS retired member who used to work in the Passport Office in Peterborough, and hi from the Social Security Scotland Glasgow branch. So thank you very much for those, and you're very welcome to join us. You joined us this evening. John, just one more question for you. Obviously, trying to get as much out of you as we can before you leave us. The Public Health England report that was published in June into the disparities and the risks and outcomes of COVID-19 provides evidence that BAME people are at a significantly higher risk of dying from COVID-19. Yet the government have simply stated that this is a fact. What are PCS and the MPs in the parliamentary group going to do to force the government to issue urgent guidance for employers on how to keep these workers safe?
First step is, I don't know whether people saw, there was a bit on TV yesterday, Andrew Marr interviewed the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, and he asked him about the part of the report that the government hasn't published. So the government only published a section of the report, didn't publish the sort of recommendations for action. Rishi Sunak wouldn't comment on that element of the report because he says, well, we haven't published that. But Andrew Marr said, well, actually it has. It may well have been leaked, but why are you holding it back? And I find it really, well, it's angry making, to be honest. We've got a really serious problem here where members of our community are at heightened risk as a result of this. The government knows that from the factual information that's been published, but they won't actually then give us absolutely clarity on what steps they're taking. So again, it's already happening in Parliament now. A number of our MPs and members of the group have been raising the issue in Parliament, lobbying ministers and demanding the full publication of the report, but also demanding a programme of action as well. I have to say this is scandalous, and it does relate, to be frank, about the nature of our society where members of the BAME community are often living in the most deprived areas, underpaid, and without the resources often to cope with issues like this pandemic. I think we need a lot more information, but that's why I think the government is loath to get involved in the debate much around this issue, because it does expose a whole range of issues about how they've managed the economy and how unequal our society is. If something comes out of, again, if something comes out of this pandemic, one of the issues, or something positive comes out of it, despite all the tragedies, one of the issues is that people recognizing that we can't tolerate this level of inequality within our society, and it starts at work, and it starts as a result of low pay, and in particular, the point that Mark made, as a result of outsourcing and privatisation.
Okay, look, thanks very much, John. And I recognise that you've given up time to join us tonight. We and our members recognise how crucial this campaign is for some of our lowest paid members. And we're really glad that you recognise that as well, and that you're willing to be part of what we're trying to do. So it's really, really, pleasing to have you here tonight. And I know you've got to go to another meeting, but thanks so much for giving up the time to join us. That's brilliant. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Okay. Thanks, John. Goodbye.
Yes.
Okay. I've got a question come in from Roy, who's a G4S guard, which I think is for Mark. I would like to ask if the union has been given a date when the government will stop paying sick pay from day one. As an outside contractor with G4S, this is a really great concern to me and my fellow workers. So, Mark, I don't know if there's anything we can say in answer to that.
No, I don't believe we've been given a specific date, and we've launched the campaign in a way to be ahead of the game because we know it's coming. Certainly, I was at the TUC this morning, and there was a report given on discussions with the Chancellor of the Exchequer around ending the support through the furlough scheme that he wants to do in September. So I think we're anticipating that this is coming sooner rather than later. And that's why we're campaigning now. We've already written to Boris Johnson asking him now for an assurance that all contracts in civil service will have to continue to be done on the basis of forcing the contractors to pay full sick pay. We wrote to him on the 8th of June. And I think it's also just worth reporting that we've raised this also with the Cabinet Office. John Maloney, our Assistant General Secretary, and yourself, Fran, are overseeing this. The NEC has set up a subcommittee to deal with FM contracts. And as you mentioned earlier, Sharon Leslie's working on this. So what we want to do is get this campaign up and running now, get it registered in Parliament, get it out there in the union to be ahead of the game. And obviously, if we hear anything direct, we will let people know. And likewise, if anyone's working for a private contractor and they approach us now to tell anyone, make sure you tell the union so that we can get onto it.
Okay, thanks very much, Mark. We've had a question in from Alan Courtney, which I think I can probably pick up. He said, can you just check what Mark said about civil servants getting 6 months full pay when sick? Was this the case at the MOJ or HMCTS in 2016? The answer to that is yes, 6 months full pay, followed by 3 months half pay. So I hope that helps, Alan, and obviously get in touch if there's anything you want to follow up in terms of all of that. I've got a question now for Ahmed. Somebody's messaged in and said, how popular is this campaign amongst your work colleagues? Have any of them joined PCS as a result of what we're doing? So over to you, Ahmed.
Well, to be quite transparent, we had the strike for equal pay, or the London living wage, as of last year. So as a result of that, we had a lot of people in the department that I've known personally who are either working in and are members beforehand, or new people that have joined in as things progress naturally. In terms of answering the question, I would say about 98% of people who have already joined are there. It's just whether they're brand new people or just discussing and making sure that they're aware of what rights that they have, how, if they have any kind of issues or if they're being mistreated, then they know that they're not alone in that particular situation. In terms of actual numbers of people that have been joining in, we've had quite a fair amount of people joining in. If I had to pin an exact figure, I would say about 10 people since the result of this, but we're going easily into the hundreds of people collectively. So I hope
that's
that
great.
that at least.
Thanks, Ahmed. And that's a real example, isn't it, of it, unions making a difference and people seeing the benefit of being in a union. So Tony, similar question for you. Is it a campaign that is popular amongst the people you work with, and are people getting involved as a result? So over to you, Tony.
Yes, it's very important to all my colleagues that, I mean, there always have been quite a few people that have been off sick, and you know, and obviously they're only getting the statutory pay. So yes, so it's important to every one of us that are, you know, in with the campaign. So yes, it's very, very important.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Tony. Okay, there's a question coming from Mark, and I think this relates to PCS reps within the civil service. How can we get involved? How can we show our support for everything that's going on? So, Mark, can you answer that one?
Yes, support of our reps in the civil service is essential, I think, to actually really making progress in this campaign. Ahmed just mentioned what happened in Bays, and obviously that showed that the union could win in Bays when our private sector members went on strike there, but also the support of the reps in the civil service, Kate and the members of the branch committee there was invaluable. So our civil service reps are key, and what we're asking people to do if they're watching this tonight is, if in your branch you have outsourced workers, if you haven't had the chance already, make sure you try to speak to people. So if you're in work, obviously speak to them, but if not, whether we can contact people through Zoom or to get people's contact details, to ensure that if people don't know about PCS, we encourage them to join, and to also get the message across that even if there's only 1 or 2 people in a workplace working for a private contractor, we can still help people. The other thing we're asking our local reps to do is to either do it themselves or ask us for help at the centre to set up contact groups. Often, you know, we're contacting a lot of people now through Zoom and WhatsApp, but in some areas where, you know, we've had reps on the ground, we've called some people together at a lunchtime or after work just to start chatting, just to start making touch base with each other. So we want every one of our civil service reps really to ask the question, where you work, are there people working for private contractors? Have we ever talked to them? If not, make a point of doing so, and then try and set up a meeting or a conversation, because even if it's people in 1s and 2s, if they join the union, we can help. And I think Ahmed's example of what's happened in Bays goes to show sometimes in the most difficult circumstances, union members sticking together, back by their union, can win. And that's what we want to do on sick pay.
Okay, thanks very much. Okay, a question for Ahmed then. Last year, you and other PCS members working at Bays were involved in a very successful campaign to be paid the London Living Wage and get more sick pay and more annual leave. Before you and other PCS members won your campaign, can you tell us what it was like for you and your workmates if you got sick?
Extremely difficult. It was more of a case of, can you literally afford to get injured or get sick? So it's just a question of, at what point do the bills get too much? And it's a nightmare because you ended up having to put on this kind of calm professional face whilst you're at work, and then going home wondering, the hell am I going to do? And not just in your own specific circumstances, but those that you care for. It doesn't necessarily have to be your own children, but those that may not be as able-bodied that you're still looking after to this day and age. It's daunting. It's daunting. The only relief was that to know that regardless of whatever circumstance you're in, you had somebody to talk to within the union, within your colleagues and everything else, and have everybody collectively together, just so you don't feel that isolated, you don't feel that alone in that kind of situation. And this is before the virus, before everything went down, and it's stressful. It's stressful, especially particularly when it came to the way that ISS was dealing with things. The company that I currently work for, there was a huge disconnect between upper management and middle management, in order that they were making grand promises and this and that, we're going to do this, we're going to look after people, this and that, and then none of it would filter through. So you're constantly wondering, am I hearing one thing? I'm expecting something else. Do I get sick? Do I get injured? And then before you know it, the stress just keeps on elevating and building up. It was only through the precise and mutual work that the reps at, in my branch in particular, have been put together that gave people the confidence to kind of raise their voice and realize that you don't want to be dealing with that for the rest of your life.
No, that's really important. Thanks, Ahmed. And for Tony, what's it like for you and your workmates to only get SSP when you're sick, and what difference will it make to you and your colleagues to receive full occupational sick pay from day one? Now, clearly, you know, I'm sure that you've got strong views on that subject, Tony.
It's very hard to think that you can't go off sick, because obviously everybody's afraid, because obviously they're not going to get paid obviously their day wages. Like I said, even myself, that I was off sick for a few years back, was very hard. And everybody's obviously is all, agreeing with the fact that we need to get sick pay. And also that with our company in Vinci, I don't see why that we can't get it when the rest of, let's say, the engineers do get full sick pay. And, it's like we're outcast when we're in the same company.
Okay, thank you. A question for Mark now. Emmanuel Gomez, a cleaner employed by OCS at the Ministry of Justice's Petit France building, continued to attend work with COVID-19 symptoms because his employer refused to pay him full pay to self-isolate. Sadly, Emmanuel became ill at work and passed away of suspected coronavirus on the 23rd of April. What is PCS doing to make sure that this needless death is not repeated?
Well, I think, first of all, the question really puts this at its most stark, because this tragic case, where someone has come into work when they're ill, no doubt in part because of the way people are treated on the low rates of statutory sick pay, and has paid an ultimate price, I think is a stain on the reputation of the Ministry of Justice and the civil service. No words now can make up for the sad loss, but we're determined that on the back of that outrageous episode, that this campaign is now successful. So we have written to the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Justice, demanding that the MOJ force OCS to carry on paying, to pay proper rates, of sick pay, like other private companies have done. And they don't just do it for the COVID crisis, that they continue to do it. And I think for us, in solidarity with the UVW and, for Manuel's family, we've got to make sure this campaign is successful, not just because, as Ahmed and Tony have graphically illustrated what it means to people, but I think the best legacy of the union can be to say that that outrageous event is marked now by that injustice being put right, and that is forcing OCS to do the right thing and forcing that to be a permanent change on it for everybody else. So when the Permanent Secretary of MOJ replies, we will be seeking a meeting to ensure that that they put it right in that department. But I also hope that everybody else does the same thing. So as you can see, we've not just written to him, we've written to Boris Johnson, as I mentioned earlier. And this campaign tonight, I think, is all about saying these things are outrageous, and we want a campaign now to ensure that what most people are doing for the crisis remains, and for the companies that have yet to do it, that they do it immediately.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much, Mark. Back to you, Ahmed. What do you think your members will do if sick pay is cut? How do you think they'll feel?
Devastated, because it's getting to the question where some people aren't, at least in my particular situation, where you generally wonder whether or not you can keep paying the rent. So it's not only just how you feel, it's a question of survival. Do you have enough to cover yourself for the next month, the next 3, 6, a year? We don't know precisely when the end of this pandemic is going to be. So every single day is another day of uncertainty, and it just compounds.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think that's a point well made. Okay, one for you, Tony. Are there other terms and conditions like holidays which should also be improved in all of this?
Well, yes. Well, in our one, we've had problems with our holidays anyway at the moment, so which is ongoing and a legal battle at the moment. And also we're having problems that they haven't paid what they're supposed to have paid, and they're still hanging on. So we're still waiting on that case. I think it's coming up in September now.
Okay, thanks so much. Okay, Mark, a question from John Paul Rosser. One of the biggest challenges is finding someone to take responsibility for resolving issues. So HMRC cleaning staff in Birmingham haven't received some or possibly any of the PPE that they need. ISS say they provided it. HMRC say they provided it, but the cleaners don't have it. This dual engagement means ISS and HMRC can give us the runaround. I think the solution is to bring the workers back in-house so that they are employees in the department they're working for. This would also get them the civil service pay rates, terms and conditions that we believe they deserve. To what extent are we campaigning for outsourced workers to be brought back in-house, and what is the response from the departments or the Cabinet Office?
So thanks very much, JP, for that question. I could not agree more. And the NEC and the union agrees that the actual answer to all of these problems has to be to bring everybody back into the civil service, where we should then have single terms and conditions and everybody should be treated the same. So we have raised, to answer that question directly, at every meeting with the Cabinet Office, we raised that all the things that were happening for our civil service members must apply to the private sector, and the best way to make that happen without delay is for them to be back in-house. And that is something that we want to continually campaign on. I mentioned earlier that the NEC has set up specifically a subcommittee dealing with our workers in FM contracts, which our Assistant General Secretary, John Maloney, is leading on, and you chair that committee. And that, I think, was the beginning of recognising that just putting demands on the government to do the right thing isn't enough. We need to now start specifically organising better. And that is key to what we're doing. That's what this event is about. And that is the way that we see getting people back in-house becomes a reality. So we organise the workers better. We try and get more of them to join the union. We raise it with our civil service reps to make sure that we're having conversations with those members in the private sector, and that we start campaigns in companies. And then we try to ensure that at the same time we're raising those in our groups to bring enough pressure to bear by a combination of negotiation, political action, and potentially industrial action. And that takes me back to that question about OCS. I mean, we are working closely with UVW. And the NEC is very clear, and Ahmed's example about what happened in Bays shows that we are prepared, working on our own or with UVW where we can and where we are, up to and including, if workers are up for it, taking industrial action to support disputes, to get better terms and conditions, and also to argue for coming back into the public sector. So I think what we're doing is trying to improve our work and ensuring that we don't just do it nationally, that it happens on the ground. Because one of the things that I just wanted to stress in answering this question also is that, you know, I mentioned earlier why a lot of this work was outsourced back in the 1980s. One of the things that you now clearly see, and we saw it with the death statistics in the civil service, is that there was a higher proportion of FM staff dying than civil servants, and a higher proportion of those deaths were members from the BAME community who were disproportionately affected by COVID. And all our work in the civil service and in the private sector tells us there's huge inequalities in the civil service and in the private companies. And this is disproportionately affecting members on equality grounds. And that is another reason why we have to challenge it root and branch. So again, I want to give the assurance that we are looking at legal action where legal action is applicable, working with other unions like the UVW where we can, backing members up to and including industrial action. But the ultimate thing that I think we want to get across tonight is that the more people who join PCS, get active in PCS, and the more of our civil service reps who engage with our private sector members, the quicker we can build a real vibrant campaign on the ground and we can win.
Okay, thanks so much, Mark. We're running out of time, but it's been really good to get your questions and your views in. So thank you very much for those that have contributed. And please publicise this campaign with everything that we're doing, because there is information on the website, but it is important that not just outsourced workers support the campaign, but that their civil service colleagues, our members, support that as well, and give it their full support in order to publicise it. Just a couple of, I mean, really, Mark, asking you to sum up, but just a couple of questions to cover in summing up. How we can use the current situation to publicise the issues affecting outsourced members to the wider public and get them to support our demands, and how facilities management and outsourced workers can support the campaign themselves. So what can they do to make sure that this campaign is a success?
Okay, so on that second one first, I'd say there's the three most important things that anyone watching this could do if you're an FM worker is join the union if you haven't joined the union, to encourage your workmates to join PCS, and then to ensure that then collectively you support PCS's campaigns and activities. So even if you're a lone voice at the moment, contact us and we will try and help go from having one member to try and get more. If you can talk to your colleagues, again, I go back to Ahmed's example that, you know, Fran, me and you went to the base picket line lots of times. And
I remember.
What amazed me was not just the support of our civil service reps, but actually it was the inspiration from the strikers themselves. Whether they were security or catering or reception, they were there doing it for themselves. And as Ahmed told us earlier, lots of people joined the union and they won. So I think to me that's the key, really, coming together, joining the union, getting others to join and getting active, and we will help support people wherever we can. And on the first part of the question, this is the launch of our campaign. We're going to be doing a survey in the next couple of weeks of members to find out what more of the issues are and what we can do to build on them. We're putting resource in where we can, and we're leading with this committee to try and organise better. And as you heard from John McDonnell tonight, we've written to Boris Johnson. We're waiting for a reply also from the MOJ Permanent Secretary. When we get these replies, we will be using them as the basis of campaigning moving forward. And I want to rest assure anybody watching, one of our key arguments will be using Boris Johnson's words back on him. He has described the people we're talking about tonight as key workers, the unsung heroes and heroines that is keeping us going, keeping us secure, keeping places clean. So talk is cheap. And if Boris Johnson doesn't do the right thing, we will use those words back to convince members of the public and other people of the worth of people like Ahmed and Tony and their colleagues, and say as the first step to dignity and justice, full sick pay from day one is a minimum they should do. But that's the first step, hopefully, when we win that, to trying to get people back in the civil service so that people can all have the same terms and conditions. Tony and Ahmed and their colleagues deserve it. Let's make sure we fight and organise to win it.
Okay, thanks so much, Mark. And as you say, union members throughout history have shown that when we stick together, we campaign together, we organise together, we can win things. So the key to all of this is to do just that. And I would urge all of you on the call to give this campaign your full support. We've had a shout out for our signer, Richard Law, for continuously signing BSL without a break. Your concentration is amazing. And Sabine from Dundee says, I tap my cap to you. So, Richard, I know sometimes your efforts go unsung, and it's great that people have recognised that. And I want to add our thanks to that, because you do an amazing job. And I'm sure it isn't easy picking up all the accents and picking up all the voices on the various calls, but you do it very, very well. And we want to say thank you for that. And to thank all of you tonight for joining us, for being part of this call, part of this launch, which, as Mark says, you'll see a lot about in the coming weeks. And our job, all of us collectively, is to get this publicised, to get as many people talking about it as possible, where people aren't in the union, asking them to join, and asking every everybody to support what should be very, very simple demands, really, and in terms of what a number of us see as a basic entitlement. That let's make sure that's extended. And in the words of JP Rosser, ultimately, we want this work brought back in house. But the way to do that is to improve the conditions of the people working on these contracts. So thank you. Thanks for taking the time to join us tonight. Stay safe, and no doubt speak to you all soon. Thanks so much. Then good night.
Good night.
Thank you.